Tonight, we're leaving the modern world behind and drifting gently back nearly 3,500 years to the peaceful banks of the ancient Nile. Before you close your eyes, imagine the first light of dawn spreading across calm water. Birds awaken in the reeds, small fishing boats drift silently with the current, and smoke begins to rise from quiet mud-brick homes as families prepare for another ordinary day. The smell of fresh bread fills the cool morning air, and the great river, just as it has for thousands of years, flows peacefully toward the sea. But this isn't the story of famous pharaohs, glittering treasures, or the towering pyramids that still stand today. Instead, tonight we'll follow the lives of the people history often forgets. We'll grow up beside the Nile, experience the excitement of first love, discover how young couples married and built families, wander through lively festivals, share simple evening meals, and uncover the gentle traditions, quiet secrets, and everyday routines that shaped life in ancient Egypt. As the years pass, we'll grow old together beneath the same star-filled sky and explore the beliefs that gave comfort at the end of life's journey. So get comfortable, relax, and let the slow rhythm of the Nile carry you into one of history's most peaceful stories. Tonight, we're not meeting kings. We're meeting the people who quietly built an extraordinary civilization, one ordinary day at a time. Imagine, for just a moment, that you are opening your eyes nearly 3,500 years ago. There is no ringing alarm, no busy road outside your window, no phone waiting with 20 new messages that somehow arrived while you were asleep. Instead, the first thing you hear is water. The Nile is already awake. It moves slowly through the morning mist, just as it did yesterday, and the day before that, and for thousands of years before anyone thought to write history down. Its gentle current carries small fishing boats across water that shines like polished bronze in the first light of dawn. The sky begins as deep blue, almost purple. Then, little by little, soft shades of pink and gold spread across the horizon. The sun is still hiding, but everyone knows it is coming. In ancient Egypt, the sunrise is more than the start of another day. It is a promise that life continues. Birds are the first to celebrate. Herons stand perfectly still near the riverbank, waiting for breakfast to swim a little too close. Ducks paddle across quiet pools left behind by the yearly flood. Somewhere among the reeds, frogs sing their final songs before the growing warmth tells them it is time to be quiet. Then the village begins to wake. Rows of simple mud-brick houses sit close together beside the river. Their flat roofs are still cool from the night air. Smoke has not yet begun to rise from cooking fires, but it soon will. One wooden door opens, then another. Soon the narrow pathways between the homes fill with sleepy footsteps. A farmer stretches his back before picking up a wooden hoe worn smooth by years of work. His oldest son follows behind, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He probably wishes the son had decided to sleep in today. Sadly for him, the son has an excellent work ethic. Nearby, a woman kneels beside a large stone grinding tool. She pours grain onto the flat surface and begins pushing the heavy grinding stone back and forth with practiced hands. The sound is steady and familiar, almost like a slow heartbeat for the village. Before long, that grain will become bread, the food that fills nearly every table in Egypt. The smell of fresh flour mixes with the cool scent of wet earth drifting from the Nile. Inside another house, younger children remain asleep beneath simple linen blankets. One little boy hugs a carved wooden toy instead of letting it roll across the floor during the night. His sister has somehow managed to steal most of the blanket without waking anyone. Some things, it seems, never change no matter what century you visit. Outside, donkeys begin announcing their opinions to the entire neighborhood. They have many opinions. None of them are quiet. Their loud calls echo across the village, joined by the gentle bleating of goats and the soft lowing of cattle waiting to be led into nearby fields. This is not noise. To the people here, this is comfort. It means another ordinary day has arrived. And ordinary days are precious. Most Egyptians are not kings or queens. They will never wear golden crowns or command great armies. Their names will not be carved into giant temples. In fact, history may never remember them at all. But they are the people who keep Egypt alive. They grow its food. They build its homes. They raise its children. They tell its stories. Without them, even the greatest pharaoh would have very little to rule. As the sunlight spreads farther across the land, the Nile reveals why it is called the gift of Egypt. Beyond the village, fields stretch toward the horizon in neat patches of green. Wheat and barley sway gently in the morning breeze. Date palms stand tall beside irrigation canals dug with patient hands over many generations. Every plant growing here owes its life to the river. Each summer, the Nile floods its banks, leaving behind rich black soil. When the water slowly returns to its normal path, it leaves a blanket of fertile earth perfect for growing crops. Without those floods, this beautiful valley would quickly become part of the endless desert surrounding it. The Egyptians understand this better than anyone. They do not fight the river. They work with it. Their calendar follows it. Their harvest depends on it. Even many of their prayers begin with gratitude for it. As more villagers step outside, greetings are exchanged with warm smiles. Neighbors know one another well. Families have often lived beside each other for generations. Everyone knows whose bread smells the sweetest, whose goat enjoys escaping fences, and which fisherman always insists that the one that got away was somehow larger than a crocodile. Strangely enough, fishermen have apparently been telling that exact story for thousands of years. Near the riverbank, several men prepare small wooden boats. They check woven nets, untangle ropes, and quietly push away from shore. The water is calm now, making it the perfect time to catch fish before the heat grows stronger. Not far away, women carry clay jars toward the river to collect fresh water. They walk together, talking softly about yesterday's work, today's plans, and perhaps a young couple in the village who have been smiling at each other a little more than usual. Even in ancient Egypt, good gossip travels almost as quickly as the Nile itself. Children begin appearing one by one, their sleepy faces slowly brightening as the village comes fully alive. Some help sweep the house, others carry baskets or fetch water. Even the youngest learn early that every pair of hands has an important job. Work is simply part of life here, yet there is no feeling of rushing. The rhythm of the day is gentle, shaped by sunlight instead of clocks. Nobody is checking the time every 5 minutes. Nobody is stuck in traffic. Nobody is arguing with a machine because it forgot their password. Instead, people watch the sky, feel the warmth of the morning, and trust the steady rhythm that has guided their families for centuries. As the sun finally climbs above the eastern horizon, golden light washes across the river, the fields, and the quiet village. Shadows grow shorter. The cool morning slowly gives way to another warm Egyptian day. Somewhere nearby, a mother calls her children inside for breakfast. A father shoulders his tools before heading toward the fields. Grandparents settle outside where they can enjoy the morning air while watching village life unfold before them. Within these simple homes, surrounded by family, laughter, work, and the endless flow of the Nile, the real story of ancient Egypt begins. Because before young hearts could fall in love, before weddings filled the streets with music, And before families built lives together along the river, every Egyptian first experienced something even more important. They were children, growing up in a world where the Nile was both teacher and provider. And that is where our journey goes next. The morning has fully arrived. The warm sunlight now reaches every corner of the village, lighting the narrow paths between the mud-brick homes. Farmers have already disappeared into the fields. Fishing boats drift farther down the Nile, and the smell of fresh bread floats gently through the air. But inside the village, another story is just beginning. It is the story of childhood. When we think about ancient Egypt, it is easy to picture giant pyramids, shining temples, and powerful pharaohs. We rarely stop to imagine something much simpler. A baby taking its very first steps. A little girl laughing while chasing a duck that clearly has no interest in being caught. A young boy proudly carrying a tiny basket, convinced he is helping far more than he actually is. Yet these small moments happened every day. Ancient Egyptians loved their children deeply. Family was the center of life, and every new child was welcomed with hope. A healthy baby meant the family would continue, the household would grow stronger, and one more pair of hands would someday help care for the land beside the Nile. Birth itself was surrounded by tradition. Women often gave birth at home with the help of experienced midwives. There were no bright hospital lights or long forms to fill out. Instead, family members stayed nearby, offering comfort while prayers were whispered to protective gods and goddesses. Many mothers looked to the goddess Hathor for protection. She was connected with motherhood, love, music, and joy. Another goddess, Tauret, with her unusual body of a pregnant hippopotamus, lion, and crocodile, was believed to guard women during childbirth. She may have looked a little frightening, but to Egyptian families, she was a comforting friend. After the baby arrived safely, the whole household could finally breathe again. A new life had begun. Soon after birth came another important moment. The child received a name. Names carried meaning in ancient Egypt. Some honored a god, while others expressed hopes for the future. Parents believed a name became part of a person's identity, almost like a small piece of their soul. Choosing one was not something done carelessly. For the first few years, children spent almost every moment close to their mothers. Mothers fed them, carried them, comforted them, and slowly introduced them to the busy rhythm of village life. There were no classrooms filled with colorful posters. Instead, the whole village became the classroom. Children learned by watching. If a father repaired a fishing net, his son often sat beside him, trying to copy every movement. If a mother baked bread, her daughter watched the careful mixing of flour and water, learning long before anyone expected her to do it alone. Of course, children were still children. Sometimes they paid more attention to butterflies than baskets. Sometimes they forgot their chores because they discovered a very interesting beetle crawling across the ground. Parents have been saying, "Please pay attention," for thousands of years. Some traditions never grow old. When work was finished, there was always time to play. Archaeologists have discovered dolls made from wood and cloth, tiny carved animals, spinning tops, balls made from leather, and simple board games. One of the most famous games was Senet, which adults enjoyed as well. The rules have been partly lost to time, but that probably never stopped an older brother from insisting he was winning. Children also invented games that left no trace behind. Running races through open fields, playing hide-and-seek between date palms, pretending to sail imaginary boats across puddles left by the Nile, laughing until someone accidentally fell into the mud. Life could be hard, but laughter was free. As children grew older, so did their responsibilities. Around the age of 5 or 6, many boys began helping their fathers more regularly. They carried tools, watched over animals, gathered firewood, or learned how to guide oxen through the fields. Girls often helped with cooking, grinding grain, weaving cloth, collecting water, and caring for younger brothers and sisters. These jobs were not meant to punish them. They were simply part of becoming an adult. Everyone contributed because everyone depended on one another. Still, not every child lived exactly the same life. If a family was wealthy, especially one connected to government or the temples, their children might receive a formal education. Young boys could attend schools where scribes taught reading, writing, mathematics, and careful record keeping. Learning to write Egyptian hieroglyphs was no easy task. There were hundreds of symbols to remember. Modern students sometimes complain about homework, but imagine memorizing hundreds of tiny pictures, each with several different meanings. Suddenly, writing one essay does not sound quite so terrible. Becoming a scribe was one of the most respected careers in Egypt. Unlike farmers, scribes worked indoors, often with clean clothes and shaded rooms. Ancient texts even praised the profession by reminding students that the pen is lighter than the plow. That was probably very encouraging to children who preferred ink over heavy farm tools. Most children, however, never became scribes. Their education came directly from daily life. They learned when to plant crops, how to recognize changes in the Nile, which herbs helped with sickness, how to repair a basket, how to respect elders, how to welcome guests into the home. These lessons could not always be written down. They were passed from one generation to the next through observation, patience, and countless quiet conversations. Family meals became another classroom. As everyone gathered to eat bread, vegetables, fish, or lentils, grandparents shared stories about past floods, successful harvests, funny neighbors, or lessons learned during difficult years. Children listened. Sometimes they asked questions. Sometimes they interrupted with questions that had absolutely nothing to do with the story. Grandparents smiled anyway. Every generation has curious little ones. The bond between brothers and sisters was also important. Older children watched over younger ones, helping them learn simple tasks and keeping them out of trouble. Well, at least trying to. Older siblings have always been part teacher, part babysitter, and part detective trying to figure out who made the mysterious mess in the corner of the house. As children slowly entered their teenage years, something began to change. Their voices grew stronger. Their work became more important. Parents trusted them with greater responsibilities. The carefree games of early childhood slowly gave way to thoughts about the future. Young men wondered whether they would become skilled farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, or scribes. Young women learned more about managing a household, weaving beautiful linen, preparing meals, and caring for a family of their own someday. And then, almost without anyone noticing, another quiet change arrived. The children who once raced through dusty village paths began noticing each other a little differently. Perhaps a young man carried water past the same house every morning, hoping to catch a certain smile. Perhaps a young woman lingered just a little longer at the village well than she truly needed to. Maybe neither one spoke very much. Sometimes, the heart begins its own conversation long before the mouth finds the courage. In villages like these, where families lived side by side and everyone shared the rhythm of the Nile, friendship often came before romance. And before long, those quiet friendships would blossom into something even more beautiful. That is where our journey continues next, as we discover how young hearts first met, and how love quietly found its place along the banks of the Nile. The children who once chased ducks along the riverbank are children no longer. The little boy who proudly carried baskets too large for his arms now walks with confidence beside his father in the fields. The young girl who learned to grind grain beside her mother has become skilled enough to prepare an entire meal herself. Time moves quietly in ancient Egypt, just like the Nile. One season flows into the next, and before anyone fully notices, childhood has become youth. And with youth comes something that every civilization, in every age, has known. The curious feeling that your heart suddenly starts paying attention to someone else. Despite what many people imagine, ancient Egypt was not a place where every marriage was arranged by strict parents who treated romance as an inconvenience. Family approval certainly mattered, especially among wealthier households. But for many ordinary Egyptians, love often came first. Young people had many chances to meet. Village life naturally brought everyone together. Every morning, the paths to the river filled with people carrying water jars. Farmers crossed the same fields. Families baked bread in nearby homes. Children helped with daily chores. Everyone attended local festivals and religious celebrations throughout the year. In a small village, strangers were rare. Everyone knew everyone. That could be comforting, could also be slightly embarrassing. If you smiled at someone a little too often, there was a very good chance your grandmother, 3 neighbors, 2 fishermen, and at least one very curious baker already knew about it by sunset. News traveled remarkably fast without a single newspaper. Imagine a young man walking toward the river with an empty clay jar balanced on his shoulder. Ahead of him, a young woman kneels beside the water, carefully filling her family's jars. The morning sun reflects off the Nile, making the surface sparkle around her. She brushes a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear as she stands. Their eyes meet for only a moment. Neither says anything. Instead, both suddenly become very interested in looking at absolutely anything else. Perhaps a palm tree, perhaps a fishing boat, perhaps one unusually confident duck. The duck has no idea it has just become part of a love story. Moments like these probably happened every day. Life beside the Nile was busy, but it was also deeply connected. Families lived close together, worked together, and celebrated together. Friendships often grew naturally over many years before becoming something more. Unlike today, there were no letters popping up on a glowing screen saying, "Hey, are you free later?" Instead, people relied on patience, and perhaps a little courage. Festivals offered some of the best opportunities for young people to spend time together. Throughout the year, villages celebrated religious holidays honoring different gods and goddesses. These were joyful occasions filled with music, food, colorful clothing, dancing, and laughter. For a little while, work slowed down. The whole community gathered. Children played games. Older people shared stories. Musicians filled the air with gentle melodies from harps, flutes, and drums. And young hearts quietly searched the crowd. Perhaps a young man found himself standing beside the same young woman during a temple procession. Perhaps they spoke about the beautiful flowers decorating the shrine. Perhaps they laughed when a curious goat wandered into the celebration as though it had been personally invited. Some things truly never change. Every festival seems to attract at least one unexpected guest. Ancient Egyptians also appreciated beauty. Both men and women took pride in their appearance. Fresh linen clothing was carefully washed and kept as clean as possible. Wealthier people wore finely woven linen so soft it almost floated in the breeze, while ordinary families wore simpler garments that were practical for daily work. Jewelry was especially popular. Necklaces made from colorful beads, bracelets, rings, and small amulets decorated both rich and poor, although the materials varied greatly. Gold belonged mostly to the wealthy, while ordinary villagers often wore beads made from clay, glass, shells, or colorful stones. Even a simple necklace could carry special meaning. It might have been a family gift, a lucky charm, or perhaps a quiet reminder of someone special. Perfume also played an important role in Egyptian life. The hot climate made scented oils especially welcome. People used fragrances made from flowers, herbs, and precious resins. Oils helped protect the skin from the dry sun while leaving behind pleasant scents. It turns out that smelling nice has been a good idea for several thousand years. One tradition that surprises many people today is the use of makeup. Men and women both wore dark kohl around their eyes. Modern visitors sometimes imagine this was done only for fashion. Fashion certainly mattered, but kohl also helped reduce the bright glare of the Egyptian sun and may even have offered some protection against eye infections. Looking elegant and staying healthy at the same time? That sounds like a rather successful invention. Hairstyles were another way people expressed themselves. Some Egyptians kept their natural hair short. Others shaved their heads completely, especially during hot weather. Many wealthier people owned carefully crafted wigs, which could be styled for special occasions. Imagine preparing for a festival by carefully choosing your nicest linen clothing, polishing your jewelry, applying scented oil, adjusting your wig, and hoping, not too obviously, that one particular person notices all your effort. Human nature has always been wonderfully familiar. Of course, attraction was about more than appearance. Kindness mattered. Good manners mattered. A hard-working person earned respect. Someone known for honesty and generosity was admired throughout the village. After all, marriage was not simply about romance. It was about building a life together. The Egyptians even left behind something especially touching: love poetry. Some of these poems have survived for more than 3,000 years, allowing us to hear voices that sound surprisingly modern. One lover compares the person they adore to the brightest star in the sky. Another speaks of the joy felt simply by walking beside the one they love. Flowers bloom throughout these poems. Birds sing. The breeze carries sweet scents. The Nile itself becomes part of the language of affection. Love is described gently, with warmth and tenderness rather than dramatic speeches. One poem imagines the beloved standing in a garden filled with blooming trees. Another dreams of simply being close enough to hear their voice. Reading these ancient words today feels strangely comforting. The people who wrote them lived in a world completely different from ours. Yet the feelings remain exactly the same. The excitement before seeing someone, the nervousness during a conversation, the quiet hope that your feelings might be returned. Some young couples likely exchanged small gifts. Fresh flowers gathered near the river, a carefully made necklace, carved wooden trinket, nothing extravagant. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the greatest meaning. Parents usually noticed these growing friendships. In many cases, families approved if the match seemed sensible and both young people genuinely cared for one another. Marriage was expected eventually, but affection between couples was not discouraged. In fact, historians believe that many marriages in ancient Egypt were based on mutual attraction and shared companionship. That may surprise people who imagine the ancient world as cold or distant. Instead, ordinary Egyptians laughed together, worked together, raised children together, and quite often fell in love. As the seasons passed, those quiet smiles beside the Nile became longer conversations. Those brief meetings at the village well turned into shared walks home after festivals. The young couple who once barely dared to look at one another now found reasons to spend a little more time together whenever family duties allowed. Soon, Words that had stayed hidden inside their hearts would finally be spoken. And in ancient Egypt, when love found its voice, it often did so through beautiful poetry, gentle songs, and whispered promises beneath the warm evening sky. That is where our story goes next. Love has a funny way of making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. A short walk to the river suddenly becomes the best part of the day. A familiar face across the village feels brighter than the morning sun. Even carrying heavy baskets seems a little easier when someone special happens to be walking the same path. For young people in ancient Egypt, these quiet feelings often found a home in something beautiful. Poetry. Long before greeting cards, text messages, or love songs on the radio, the Egyptians were writing some of the most heartfelt romantic words the ancient world has ever left behind. Many of these poems have survived for more than 3,000 years. They were written on scraps of papyrus, pieces of broken pottery called ostraca, and even copied by students who were learning to write. Thanks to Egypt's dry climate, these fragile words escaped the passing of time. And when historians read them today, they discover something unexpected. Ancient lovers sounded surprisingly modern. One young man did not boast about riches or great adventures. Instead, he simply admired the woman he loved. Another dreamed of nothing more exciting than walking beside the person who made his heart race. It turns out that romance has always preferred simple moments over dramatic speeches. One poem compares a beloved woman to a flower blooming in a quiet garden. Another speaks of her voice as sweet as birds singing at sunrise. The language is soft and gentle. Nature appears everywhere. Lotus flowers open with the morning light. Palm trees sway in the warm breeze. The Nile flows peacefully in the background, almost becoming another silent character in every love story. The Egyptians did not separate romance from nature. To them, the beauty of the land reflected the beauty of love itself. Imagine a young man sitting beneath the shade of a sycamore tree after a long morning in the fields. The day's work is finally finished. The air has cooled. He holds a small piece of papyrus and carefully dips his reed pen into black ink. Writing is not easy. Every symbol must be drawn with patience. One mistake means starting all over again. He smiles to himself. Apparently, love has always been willing to create extra work. Perhaps he writes only a few lines. Nothing too grand. Just enough to say that seeing her smile made the whole day brighter. Or maybe he never gives her the letter at all. Many love letters throughout history have probably remained hidden forever. Sometimes the heart is brave. Sometimes it is still thinking about it. Not everyone in ancient Egypt could read or write, of course. Writing was a special skill, usually learned by scribes or people from wealthier families. For most ordinary villagers, love was shared through spoken words instead, or through music. Music filled Egyptian life. It echoed through festivals, family celebrations, temple ceremonies, and quiet evenings beside the Nile. Harps, flutes, drums, and simple clapping rhythms created melodies that were both joyful and peaceful. Some songs celebrated the gods, others celebrated harvests, and some celebrated love. We no longer know the exact melodies, but many of the lyrics have survived. They speak of waiting patiently for someone to arrive. They describe the excitement of seeing a loved one from across the river. They tell stories of hearts that become restless when separated. These are not tales of impossible romance. They are gentle reminders that people have always hoped to be loved in return. Many poems also mention flowers, especially the blue lotus. Today, we often think of roses as the flower of romance. For the Egyptians, the lotus carried deep meaning. Each morning it opened with the sunrise. Each evening it gently closed again. It became a symbol of beauty, renewal, and new beginnings. Offering someone a fresh lotus flower may have been one quiet way of saying what words sometimes struggle to express. I am thinking of you. That message seems to survive every language. The Egyptians also enjoyed spending time in gardens. We often imagine ancient Egypt as endless desert. But along the Nile, wealthy homes and temple grounds could contain beautiful gardens filled with flowering plants, fruit trees, ponds, birds, and shaded walkways. These peaceful places offered moments away from the busy world. Perhaps two young people walked slowly beneath date palms while family members chatted nearby. Perhaps they exchanged smiles more than words. Sometimes silence says enough, especially when both people are hoping the other speaks first. Village life itself created many natural opportunities for romance. Collecting water, gathering vegetables, helping prepare festivals, visiting neighbors, even caring for animals. Daily life was shared. Friendship grew naturally before love had the chance to appear. There were no fancy restaurants for candlelit dinners, no movie theaters, no weekend road trips. Instead, romance lived inside ordinary moments, walking home together after sunset, sharing fresh figs beneath a tree, laughing because a stubborn donkey refused to move until offered a snack. The donkey naturally believed this was entirely reasonable. Ancient Egyptian love also carried respect. Many poems admire not only beauty but character. A kind voice, a gentle smile, patience, loyalty. These qualities appear again and again. Physical beauty was appreciated, but lasting affection reached much deeper. One remarkable feature of Egyptian love poetry is its optimism. Unlike some later traditions filled with tragic endings and impossible heartbreak, Egyptian poems often celebrate happiness. They imagine future marriages, peaceful homes, growing old together. Love is presented as something joyful rather than something forbidden. That hopeful spirit tells us a great deal about Egyptian society. Marriage was not simply a legal arrangement. It was expected to become a partnership, a friendship, a shared life. As feelings grew stronger, families often began to notice. A mother might quietly smile after seeing her son volunteer to fetch water far more often than necessary. A father might notice his daughter taking a little extra care when preparing for a festival. Parents had once been young themselves. Very little escaped their attention. Of course, every village also had someone who noticed absolutely everything. The friendly neighbor, the talkative aunt, the fisherman who somehow knew everyone's business despite spending half the day on the river. Every community has one. Some traditions truly refuse to disappear. Eventually, quiet conversations turned into serious ones. Families met. Future plans were discussed. The young couple who had once exchanged shy smiles across the Nile now stood on the edge of a much greater adventure. Marriage. Not because romance was ending, but because, in ancient Egypt, marriage was often seen as the natural beginning of a life built together. Soon there would be new homes to prepare, meals to share, children to raise, joys and challenges waiting side by side. The poems would become everyday conversations. The flowers would become family gardens. The hopeful dreams would slowly become ordinary life. And along the banks of the timeless Nile, another love story would quietly begin its next chapter. By the time two young people decided they wanted to spend their lives together, very little about their feelings was still a secret. Their families had noticed. Their neighbors had definitely noticed. And the woman who collected water every morning while somehow knowing everyone else's business? She had probably noticed months ago. In a small Egyptian village, love did not stay hidden for very long. But unlike many people imagine, marriage in ancient Egypt was often less about grand ceremonies and more about beginning a shared life. There was no single official wedding ritual that looked the same across all of Egypt. There were no towering cathedrals, no long walks down flower-covered aisles, and no photographers asking everyone to smile one more time. For many ordinary Egyptians, a couple became husband and wife simply by moving into the same home and beginning their life together. It sounds almost surprisingly simple, yet behind that simple step was a great deal of thought. Marriage was not only about romance, it was about partnership. It meant building a home, sharing work, raising children, caring for aging parents, and facing every season of life together. Love may have opened the door, but trust kept it open. Before the couple began their new life, both families usually talked things through. These conversations were important. Parents wanted to know that their son or daughter would be cared for. They discussed practical matters like property, household goods, and future responsibilities. Wealthier families sometimes created written marriage agreements, especially if land or valuable belongings were involved. These agreements may sound unromantic today, but in many ways they protected both husband and wife. Ancient Egypt was unusual for its time because women enjoyed rights that many women in other ancient civilizations did not. An Egyptian woman could own property in her own name. She could buy and sell goods. She could inherit wealth from her parents. She could even take legal action in court if necessary. Perhaps most surprising of all, if a marriage failed, divorce was possible. It was not encouraged, of course. Most couples hoped to stay together for life. But if the relationship became unhappy or impossible, either husband or wife could end the marriage. Property was often divided according to agreements made earlier. For an ancient civilization, this was remarkably fair. It reminds us that history is often more complicated than our assumptions. When the families finally agreed, preparations for the new household began. Friends and relatives offered gifts. Nothing extravagant for most villagers. Perhaps woven baskets, clay pots, wooden stools, linen cloth, storage jars for grain, simple furniture made by local craftsmen. These were not luxury presents. They were practical things that helped a young couple build a comfortable home. And honestly, a sturdy cooking pot probably lasted longer than some modern wedding gifts. As the special day approached, excitement quietly spread through the village. There may not have been elaborate ceremonies, but there was certainly reason to celebrate. Neighbors gathered. Children ran between the houses, trying very hard to help and occasionally succeeding. Cooking fires burned from early morning. Fresh bread came out of clay ovens. Fish from the Nile were prepared with herbs. Dates, figs, onions, lentils, and vegetables filled large baskets. For wealthier families, roasted duck or goose might appear on the table. And of course, there was beer. Not because everyone planned to forget the celebration, because beer was one of Egypt's everyday drinks. Made from barley, it was nutritious, refreshing, and much safer than water that had been left standing too long. Children often drank lighter versions, while adults enjoyed stronger brews during festivals and celebrations. The meal brought everyone together. Families laughed. Stories were shared. Grandparents smiled as they watched another generation begin its journey. Music soon followed. The sound of harps drifted through the warm evening air. Flutes added cheerful melodies. Drums kept a steady rhythm that encouraged even the shyest guests to clap along. Before long, people were dancing, not with carefully practiced steps learned from expensive lessons, just joyful movement shared between neighbors and friends. Children copied the adults. Adults pretended not to notice. Everyone laughed anyway. Somewhere in the middle of the celebration, the young couple probably found a quiet moment together. Away from the music, away from the conversations. Perhaps they stood beside the Nile as the evening breeze cooled the warm air. The river reflected hundreds of tiny stars. For a few peaceful minutes, the noisy celebration faded into the background. Tomorrow would bring work. There would always be work. Fields to tend, bread to bake, water to carry, animals to feed. Life in ancient Egypt was never lazy, but tonight belonged to hope. The young husband might promise to build a safe home. The young wife might speak of the family they dreamed of raising together. Neither could know exactly what the future held. There would be good harvests. There might also be difficult years. There would be laughter. There would almost certainly be disagreements over something completely ordinary. Perhaps one day they would argue over whose turn it was to chase the goat back into its pen. Marriage has always included little adventures. Yet through all of it, partnership remained the heart of Egyptian family life. Ancient artwork often shows husbands and wives standing side by side. Sometimes they hold hands. Sometimes the wife gently places her arm around her husband's shoulder. These are surprisingly affectionate images. They suggest closeness rather than distance, friendship rather than strict formality. Many tomb inscriptions also speak warmly about husbands and wives who remained devoted throughout their lives. One husband described his wife as the lady of my house. Another praised her kindness and loyalty. Some women remembered their husbands with equal affection. These words feel deeply human. They remind us that behind every ancient statue stood real people who loved, worried, laughed, and dreamed much like we do today. Marriage also brought new responsibilities. The couple now managed their own household. Every decision belonged to both of them. They planned food supplies, organized daily work, saved grain after harvest, looked after elderly parents when needed, prepared for the arrival of children. In many ways, they became a small team working toward the same future. And perhaps that explains why marriage lasted so successfully for many families. It was never simply about romance. Romance may have brought two hearts together, but everyday life gave those hearts a reason to stay together. Each sunrise offered another chance to build something lasting. Not a pyramid of stone, but something far more personal. A home filled with kindness. A table where family gathered each evening. Children whose laughter echoed through the courtyard. A life shared one ordinary day at a time. Soon the celebrations would end. The music would grow quiet. Guests would return to their own homes. The newly married couple would step through the doorway of a small mud brick house that was now theirs. Inside waited simple furniture, cooking pots, woven baskets, and dreams for the future. It was not a palace. It did not need to be, because within those humble walls, beside the steady flow of the Nile, they would begin building the greatest treasure most ordinary Egyptians ever hoped to have, a home. The music has faded. The last guests have wandered home beneath a sky filled with stars. The laughter from the wedding celebration now feels like a happy memory, carried away by the gentle breeze blowing across the Nile. As the first light of morning returns, the newly married couple wakes to their very first day together. There is no grand palace waiting for them, no servants standing outside the door, no golden throne tucked into the corner of the room. Instead, there is something far more valuable, a place they can call home. For most ordinary Egyptians, home was a modest mud brick house built with the materials the Nile generously provided. Every year, after the river flooded, it left behind thick black mud along its banks. Villagers mixed this mud with straw, shaped it into bricks, and left them to dry beneath the hot Egyptian sun. Simple, strong, and surprisingly effective. Some of these homes lasted for many years, though they needed repairs from time to time. A cracked wall after heavy rain or a worn roof after years of sunshine was simply part of life. Fortunately, everyone knew how to fix them. Building a house was often a family effort. Brothers, cousins, neighbors, and friends all helped when needed. After all, the same people helping you today might be asking for your help next season. The outside of the house looked plain, but inside it was carefully arranged to make everyday life as comfortable as possible. The walls kept much of the daytime heat outside. Small windows allowed fresh air to move through the rooms without letting too much sunlight pour in. The flat roof became one of the family's favorite places during the evening. After sunset, when the air finally cooled, people often climbed onto the roof to relax, tell stories, or simply enjoy the stars. It was also an excellent place to sleep during the hottest nights. Long before air conditioning, Egyptians had already found a clever solution. Inside the home, furniture was simple but practical. Wood was precious in Egypt, so every piece mattered. A few low stools stood near the walls. Small wooden tables held food or household items. Storage chests protected clothing, jewelry, and family treasures from dust and curious little hands. Sleeping was much simpler than many people imagine. There were no giant feather mattresses. Most families slept on woven reed mats or simple wooden beds covered with linen sheets. It may not sound luxurious today, but after spending an entire day working beneath the Egyptian sun, almost any bed probably felt wonderfully comfortable. The kitchen was the busiest part of the house. Each morning began with familiar routines. The wife, often helped by older daughters or other family members, prepared grain for bread. Using a heavy grinding stone required patience and strength. It was hard work, but it had become second nature after years of practice. Soon flour filled the air like a soft cloud. Dough was mixed by hand. Small loaves were shaped and placed into clay ovens. The warm smell of baking bread slowly spread through the house. It is a smell that has welcomed families home for thousands of years. Nearby, clay jars stored water, beer, cooking oil, dried beans, and grain. Every household tried to keep enough food to last between harvests. Nothing was wasted if it could be helped. A cracked pot might become a storage container. An old basket could still carry vegetables. Even leftover bread found its way into new meals. Ancient Egyptians understood something modern people sometimes forget. Taking care of what you have is often better than replacing it. The house itself stayed busy from sunrise until evening, sweeping dust from the floor, preparing meals, repairing clothing, weaving linen, making baskets, sharpening tools. There was always something that needed attention. Yet these daily tasks were rarely carried out alone. Marriage in ancient Egypt was built on cooperation. The husband usually spent much of the day farming, fishing, building, or practicing his trade. The wife managed the household, but her responsibilities reached far beyond cooking. She organized food supplies, managed storage, oversaw servants if the family was wealthy enough to have them, helped with weaving and trading, raised children. Sometimes she even joined agricultural work during especially busy seasons. Both husband and wife worked incredibly hard, just in different ways. Their success depended on one another. Neither role was truly complete without the other. Of course, no home stayed perfectly quiet. Children soon filled the rooms with energy. Tiny feet hurried across the floor. Wooden toys somehow appeared in places where nobody remembered leaving them. questions arrived one after another. Why is the sky blue? Can I help? Can I have another piece of bread? Can I keep this baby goat? That last question probably ended differently depending on who answered. Family life was full of small surprises. Parents taught their children through example rather than long speeches. A father showed his son how to repair a fishing net. A mother demonstrated how to weave linen or prepare bread. Grandparents added stories filled with wisdom gathered over many decades. The entire household became a school without walls. Many homes also contained something deeply personal, a small household shrine. Unlike the enormous temples dedicated to the gods, these shrines were private spaces where families offered quiet prayers. A small statue, a carved figure, fresh flowers, a little food, perhaps a burning lamp. Every morning or evening, family members paused here for just a few peaceful moments. They thanked the gods, asked for protection, prayed for healthy children, good harvests, safe journeys, simple hopes that still sound familiar today. Animals also shared many Egyptian homes. Cats were especially welcome. They protected stored grain by catching mice and rats, making them both useful workers and beloved companions. Some cats became so treasured that families mourned them when they died. Imagine that. Thousands of years before internet videos made cats famous, ancient Egyptians had already decided they were rather wonderful. Dogs guarded homes. Geese wandered courtyards. Goats occasionally tested everyone's patience by eating exactly the plants they were not supposed to eat. Some household traditions never become old. As evening approached, the pace of the day slowly softened. The heat faded. Cooking fires burned once more. Neighbors greeted one another while returning from the fields. Children played outside until their parents called them home. The family gathered for another simple meal of bread, vegetables, fish, dates, and beer. No one hurried. There were stories to tell about the day's work, small successes to celebrate, little problems to laugh about. Perhaps someone mentioned the donkey that stubbornly refused to move all afternoon. The donkey, naturally, believed it had been completely reasonable. After dinner, oil lamps filled the rooms with warm golden light. The flickering flames danced softly against the mud brick walls. Outside, the Nile continued its endless journey toward the sea. Inside, husband and wife finally enjoyed a few quiet moments together after another busy day. There was no need for grand romance every evening. Sometimes love looked much simpler. Sharing a meal, finishing each other's chores, smiling across the room, sitting together beneath a sky filled with stars. These ordinary moments slowly became the foundation of a happy life. Because in ancient Egypt, love was not measured by expensive gifts or dramatic speeches. It was measured by thousands of small acts of kindness repeated day after day. And perhaps nowhere did those quiet acts become more meaningful than around the family table, where fresh bread, cool beer, sweet dates, and simple meals brought everyone together. So now, as another peaceful day comes to an end, let us step inside the warm kitchen of an Egyptian home and discover the comforting foods that filled both stomachs and hearts along the banks of the timeless Nile. As the first light of dawn stretches across the Nile once again, one smell begins to drift through the village before almost any other. Fresh bread. If you could travel back to ancient Egypt with your eyes closed, there is a good chance bread would be the first thing you noticed. Warm, earthy, and comforting, its scent floated from nearly every home each morning. It was more than food. It was the foundation of everyday life. For an ordinary Egyptian family, a meal without bread would have felt incomplete, almost as strange as breakfast without tea or coffee might feel to many people today. Every loaf began with hard work. After the harvest, wheat and barley were carefully stored in large clay jars to protect them from moisture and hungry pests. Each day, enough grain was taken out to be ground into flour. This was no quick task. A woman would kneel beside a heavy grinding stone, pushing another smooth stone back and forth over the grain. The motion was slow, steady, and repeated hundreds of times. It demanded strength, patience, and practice. By the end, fine flour covered her hands, her clothes, and probably a little of her face as well. The bread was clearly winning the first round. Once enough flour had been prepared, water was added to form a simple dough. Sometimes salt, herbs, dates, or honey were mixed in for extra flavor, depending on what the family could afford. The dough was shaped into small round loaves and baked inside hot clay ovens. The result was simple but satisfying. Warm bread with a crisp crust and a soft center that filled both the stomach and the home with comfort. Some loaves were shaped like circles. Others looked like cones or flat cakes. Archaeologists have even found evidence of dozens of different bread shapes, proving that bakers enjoyed a little creativity long before modern bakeries filled their windows with fancy displays. Of course, bread was only the beginning. The Nile itself was an endless source of food. Every morning, fishermen pushed their small wooden boats into the calm water, carrying woven nets and simple hooks. The river was filled with fish such as tilapia, catfish, perch, and mullet. Some fish were cooked fresh over open fires, while others were salted or dried to last longer. Fishing was not always easy. Some days the nets came back heavy. Other days they came back looking almost as empty as the fishermen's hopes. Fortunately, fishermen have always believed that tomorrow's catch would surely be bigger. Hope, it seems, floats quite well. Along the riverbanks, birds also provided food. Duck and goose appeared on the tables of wealthier families during celebrations, while ordinary villagers enjoyed them less often. Chickens, interestingly, did not become common in Egypt until much later, so ducks and geese were far more familiar sights. Vegetables added color and flavor to daily meals. Onions, garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, beans, lentils, chickpeas, and leeks were all widely eaten. These foods grew well in the fertile soil left behind by the Nile's yearly flood. Garlic was especially popular. Many workers believed it gave them strength and energy. Whether it truly made them stronger or simply made everyone stand a little farther away while talking is difficult to say. Fruit was nature's dessert. Sweet dates hung from tall palm trees that lined the riverbanks. Figs ripened beneath the warm Egyptian sun. Grapes, pomegranates, and melons appeared when the seasons were right. Children probably waited impatiently for fresh fruit just as children today wait for their favorite treats. Some things never change. Honey was the main sweetener. There was no refined sugar, so honey was treasured for adding sweetness to cakes, bread, and special festival foods. Beekeeping was already well developed, and jars of honey were valuable enough to be offered in temples and placed inside tombs. After all, if something tasted that good, perhaps it was worth enjoying forever. One drink appeared at almost every meal is beer. Now, before anyone imagines loud taverns and questionable decisions, ancient Egyptian beer was quite different from many modern versions. It was thick, nourishing, and made mainly from barley or wheat. It contained less alcohol than many beers today and provided important nutrients. Since river water was not always safe to drink after standing for long periods, freshly brewed beer often became a reliable daily beverage. Adults drank it regularly. Children usually drank lighter versions. Even workers building royal monuments received beer as part of their wages. Imagine explaining that to a modern accountant. Your monthly salary includes grain, sandals, and several jars of beer. The paperwork would certainly be interesting. Meals themselves were simple but meaningful. Families usually ate together whenever work allowed. There was no dining room filled with expensive furniture. People often sat on low stools or woven mats, gathering around small wooden tables or placing food directly within easy reach. Bread was broken by hand. Fish was shared. Vegetables were passed from one family member to another. No one worried about matching plates or perfect table decorations. The meal was about being together. Conversation flowed as naturally as the Nile outside. A father spoke about the fields and whether this year's crops looked promising. A mother planned tomorrow's baking. Children eagerly described everything they had done that day, often beginning with the least important detail and somehow making it the longest story. Grandparents listened patiently, smiling as only grandparents can. These evening meals became the heartbeat of family life. Stories passed from one generation to the next. Lessons were shared without feeling like lessons. Children learned kindness, respect, and responsibility simply by sitting at the same table each evening. Festivals, of course, brought even grander meals. Families prepared extra bread, roasted birds, fresh fruit, sweet cakes, and the finest beer they could afford. Neighbors exchanged dishes, visitors were warmly welcomed, and no one wanted a guest to leave hungry. Hospitality was a matter of pride. Offering food to someone was also a way of offering friendship. Even strangers could expect kindness if they arrived peacefully. For wealthier Egyptians, the table looked rather different. Fine cuts of beef, roasted goose, imported wines, expensive spices, almonds, and carefully prepared desserts appeared more often. Servants carried elegant dishes while musicians entertained guests. Yet despite these differences, one thing remained the same. Whether rich or poor, every family gathered around food. Every loaf of bread represented someone's hard work. Every fish carried from the Nile represented another successful morning. Every shared meal strengthened the bonds between parents, children, grandparents, and neighbors. Food nourished far more than the body. It nourished the home itself. As the evening slowly settled over the village, the final pieces of bread disappeared from the table. Clay cups stood empty, conversations grew quieter, and children rubbed sleepy eyes after another busy day. Tomorrow the bread would be baked again. The fish would be caught again. The grain would be ground again. Life beside the Nile moved in comforting circles, each day gently repeating the one before. And before families drifted off to sleep, many took one last look at themselves in polished bronze mirrors, adjusted a necklace, smoothed a linen robe, or brushed scented oil onto their skin. For in ancient Egypt, beauty was not only admired, it was woven into everyday life itself. That is where our journey takes us next, as we step into the fascinating world of beauty, fashion, and the quiet luxuries that made ordinary Egyptians feel their very best. As the morning sun climbs higher above the Nile, the village slowly comes alive once again. Bread is already baking. Fishermen have pushed their boats into the river. Farmers are working in the fields, and children are beginning another busy day. But before many Egyptians stepped outside, they often spent a few quiet moments getting ready. Not because they were vain, not because they expected to meet a pharaoh, simply because looking clean, healthy, and well cared for was an important part of daily life. It might surprise us today, but ancient Egyptians were among the most fashion-conscious people of the ancient world. Even ordinary families took pride in their appearance. The hot Egyptian climate shaped almost everything they wore. Heavy wool would have been unbearable beneath the blazing sun, so linen became the fabric of choice. Linen was made from the flax plant, which grew well along the fertile banks of the Nile. After harvesting, the fibers were carefully spun into thread and woven into cloth. The process took patience. Hours became days. Days became weeks. Every piece of linen represented countless careful movements of skilled hands. For most villagers, clothing was simple. Men often wore short linen kilts tied around the waist, especially while working in the fields or fishing along the river. Women usually wore long, lightweight linen dresses that allowed them to move comfortably while cooking, weaving, or caring for the household. The designs were practical rather than extravagant. Yet there was beauty in their simplicity. Freshly washed white linen reflected the sunlight and helped keep the body cool during long summer days. It also gave people a clean and neat appearance. Nothing complicated, just comfortable. Children, especially very young ones, often wore little clothing at all during the hottest months. The Egyptian sun could be relentless, and simplicity was often the most sensible choice. As children grew older, they gradually began dressing more like the adults around them. Of course, not everyone dressed exactly the same. Wealthy families enjoyed finer linen woven so smoothly that it almost seemed to float in the breeze. Their garments sometimes featured delicate pleats and elegant folds that required tremendous skill to create. For ordinary villagers, the cloth was coarser but still carefully made. No matter their social class, people appreciated clothing that was clean and well maintained. In many homes, repairing clothes was simply another part of daily life. A small tear did not mean throwing a garment away. It meant reaching for a needle and thread. The Egyptians understood the value of caring for what they owned. Jewelry added color where clothing remained simple. Almost everyone wore some kind of ornament, even if it was made from humble materials. Necklaces of bright blue beads rested around the neck. Bracelets decorated wrists. Simple rings caught the sunlight as people worked. Children sometimes wore tiny protective charms tied around their necks by loving parents. For wealthier Egyptians, jewelry became even more impressive. Gold sparkled in the sunlight. Silver, though rarer than gold in Egypt, was highly treasured. Turquoise, carnelian, lapis lazuli, and other colorful stones were carefully shaped into beautiful pieces that displayed both wealth and craftsmanship. But jewelry was not only decoration. Many pieces were believed to protect the wearer from illness or bad luck. A small amulet shaped like the Eye of Horus might guard against danger. A scarab beetle symbolized renewal and good fortune. Wearing these charms offered comfort as much as beauty. One of the most famous parts of Egyptian fashion was something many people still recognize today: the dark lines around the eyes. Both men and women used black coal to outline their eyes with remarkable skill. Modern movies often show this as purely cosmetic. The truth is even more interesting. Coal certainly made the eyes appear striking, but it also helped reduce the harsh glare of the desert sun. Some ingredients may even have helped prevent certain eye infections, which were common in Egypt's dusty climate. Looking elegant while protecting your eyesight? That is a rather clever combination. Preparing the makeup required care. Small cosmetic jars held powdered minerals. Tiny wooden sticks or smooth applicators carefully placed the coal around the eyes. Polished bronze mirrors allowed people to check their appearance before leaving home. The mirrors were not perfectly clear by modern standards, but they reflected enough to make sure everything looked just right. Hair was equally important. Some Egyptians proudly wore their natural hair. Others preferred to shave their heads completely. At first, that might sound unusual, but in Egypt's intense heat, a shaved head was practical, clean, and much easier to care for. Special occasions, however, often called for something more elegant. Many wealthier Egyptians owned wigs. These were carefully crafted from human hair, wool, or plant fibers and styled into beautiful curls or neat braids. A well-made wig could be expensive, but it also lasted for many years if properly cared for. Imagine opening a wooden chest before a festival and choosing your finest wig with the same excitement many people today feel when picking out clothes for a special evening. Some habits truly survived the centuries. Perfume completed the preparation. The Egyptians adored pleasant scents. Fragrant oils made from lotus flowers, lilies, myrrh, frankincense, cedar, cinnamon, and other precious plants were gently rubbed onto the skin. These oils softened the effects of the dry climate while leaving behind delicate aromas that lingered throughout the day. During celebrations, wealthier guests sometimes wore small cones of scented wax on top of their wigs. As the evening grew warmer, the wax slowly melted, releasing perfume into the air. It was both practical and wonderfully dramatic. Imagine arriving at a party already smelling delightful, and somehow becoming even more pleasant as the evening continued. Ancient Egypt certainly knew how to make an entrance. Sandals protected people's feet from hot ground and rough paths. Most ordinary sandals were woven from papyrus reeds or leather. Many people, however, walked barefoot inside their homes or while working in soft fields beside the Nile. Shoes were useful, but comfort often came first. Beauty was never completely separated from health. Cleanliness mattered greatly. People bathed regularly whenever possible, washing away dust and sweat after long days beneath the sun. They used oils instead of harsh soaps to keep their skin soft. Simple combs, razors, tweezers, and small cosmetic tools have all been discovered by archaeologists, showing just how much attention Egyptians gave to personal care. It was not about vanity. It was about respect. Respect for oneself. Respect for family. Respect for the gods, who were believed to value order, cleanliness, and harmony. And perhaps, if we are being honest, there was one more reason. Love. A young man might smooth his linen kilt before walking to the village well, quietly hoping someone special would notice. A young woman might carefully place fresh lotus-scented oil on her wrists before attending a festival, pretending it was just part of her usual routine. Neither would admit the real reason. Neither needed to. Sometimes the smallest details speak the loudest. As the day slowly turned toward evening, beautiful clothing, shining jewelry, fragrant oils, and smiling faces gathered throughout the village. Another festival was about to begin. Music would soon echo across the Nile. Harps would sing. Flutes would dance through the warm night air. Families would celebrate together. And somewhere among the joyful crowds, love stories would quietly continue to bloom beneath the golden light of ancient Egypt. Not every day in ancient Egypt was filled with hard work. The fields needed tending. The fishing nets needed mending. The bread still had to be baked every morning. But every now and then, the ordinary rhythm of life paused for something special. A festival. And when a festival arrived, it felt as though the whole village took a deep, happy breath. Long before sunrise, excitement could already be felt in the air. Children woke earlier than usual without being asked. a rare miracle that parents probably appreciated. Women finished their baking before the morning grew too warm. Men completed only the most important chores, knowing that today's work would soon give way to celebration. Even the animals seemed to notice something was different. The donkeys were just as loud as ever. Some traditions simply refused to change. As the sun climbed into the bright blue sky, families began preparing themselves. Fresh linen clothing was carefully shaken free of dust. Favorite necklaces were lifted from wooden chests. Bracelets caught the morning light. A little scented oil was gently rubbed onto the skin. Children stood as still as children possibly could while their parents adjusted a loose necklace or straightened a small braid, which, to be fair, usually lasted about 10 seconds. Soon the narrow streets filled with smiling faces. Neighbors greeted one another warmly. Friends who had been busy with harvests or fishing finally had time to stop and talk. For a little while, no one seemed to be in a hurry. That may have been one of the greatest gifts a festival offered. Time to simply enjoy one another. Many Egyptian festivals honored the gods. Religion was woven into everyday life, and these celebrations were moments of gratitude as well as joy. Families brought offerings of bread, fruit, flowers, and beer to local temples. Priests carried sacred statues of the gods through the streets during grand processions. People lined the roads to catch a glimpse of these beautifully decorated shrines as they passed. To the Egyptians, this was more than ceremony. It was a moment when the gods came closer to the people. Children watched with wide eyes. Older villagers bowed their heads respectfully. The sound of prayers mixed gently with cheerful conversation. Faith and celebration walked side by side. One of the most famous celebrations was the Festival of Opet in the great city of Thebes. There, sacred boats carried the statues of the gods along the Nile, while enormous crowds gathered to celebrate. Although most ordinary villagers would never experience festivals on such a grand scale, local celebrations followed much the same spirit. Communities came together. Families reunited. Life slowed down long enough to remember that joy was just as important as work. And where there are festivals, there is music. The first notes often drifted softly through the air before anyone even noticed. A harp began to play. Its gentle strings created calm, flowing melodies that seemed almost as peaceful as the Nile itself. Then came the flutes. Their bright voices danced above the deeper sound of drums. Small hand rattles called sistrums added a shimmering rhythm that echoed through temple courtyards and village squares. Soon, the entire celebration seemed to breathe with music. No loudspeakers, no microphones, just skilled hands and simple instruments creating songs that filled the warm Egyptian air. Some melodies honored the gods. Others celebrated successful harvests. Many simply invited people to smile, and people gladly accepted the invitation. Before long, dancing began. Not everyone was a professional performer. Most were simply neighbors enjoying themselves. Children spun in excited circles until they became dizzy. Older couples swayed gently to familiar tunes they had heard many times before. Friends clapped their hands together, keeping the rhythm alive. Laughter spread almost as quickly as the music itself. Professional dancers sometimes entertained wealthier audiences or performed during temple festivals. Their graceful movements amazed everyone watching. But the happiest dances were often the simplest ones, the kind where nobody worried about getting every step exactly right. The Egyptians understood something we sometimes forget. Joy does not require perfection. It only asks that we join in. Food, of course, was everywhere. Long wooden tables and woven baskets overflowed with fresh bread, roasted duck, grilled fish, sweet dates, ripe figs, onions, cucumbers, and little honey cakes prepared especially for the occasion. Clay cups were filled again and again with cool beer. Children reached eagerly for fruit. Grandparents encouraged everyone to eat just a little more. Some family traditions truly never disappear. Hospitality became almost a celebration of its own. Guests were welcomed warmly. Travelers passing through the village might even receive food despite being complete strangers. Sharing a meal was considered an act of kindness. No one wanted another person to leave hungry. As the afternoon softened into evening, the festival became even more beautiful. The fierce Egyptian sun slowly relaxed. Golden light spread across the Nile. Palm trees cast long shadows over the village paths. Oil lamps were prepared for later, waiting patiently for darkness to arrive. It was during these peaceful hours that romance often found its quiet opportunity. Young men and women who had spent weeks exchanging shy glances now found themselves standing near one another during the celebrations. Perhaps they walked together beside the river while musicians continued playing in the background. Perhaps they shared fresh dates beneath the shade of a palm tree. Perhaps they laughed together as a curious child accidentally chased a goose through the middle of an important dance. The goose, naturally, believed it was improving the performance. Festivals gave young couples something daily work rarely allowed: time. There was no need to rush back to the fields. No fishing nets demanding repair. No urgent chores waiting at home. For one precious evening, life slowed down enough for conversations to grow longer. A simple smile became easier. A quiet compliment felt a little braver. Perhaps this was when one young man finally gathered the courage to offer a small lotus flower. Not with dramatic speeches, just a gentle smile. The flower said everything he struggled to put into words. The young woman accepted it carefully. No promises were spoken. None were needed. Sometimes hope is carried in the smallest gestures. Parents watched these moments with quiet understanding. They remembered their own youth, their own festivals, their own first walks beneath the evening sky. Life moved forward just as the Nile always had. One generation slowly passed its place to the next. As darkness settled across the village, thousands of stars appeared overhead. The music became softer. Children curled sleepily against their parents. The final songs drifted into the warm night air, while the river reflected both moonlight and flickering oil lamps. The celebration was ending. Tomorrow work would begin again. The bread would need baking. The fields would need tending. The boats would return to the water. But tonight left behind something more lasting than music. It strengthened friendships. It reunited families, created memories, and for more than a few couples, it quietly marked the beginning of a lifelong love story. Yet when the songs faded and the doors of each home gently closed, another side of Egyptian family life began. A quieter world, one hidden from public celebrations. A world of whispered prayers, family traditions, protective charms, new life, and the private moments shared only within the walls of home. Let us quietly step inside, where some of ancient Egypt's most fascinating everyday secrets were kept. As the last notes of music disappear into the night, the village slowly grows quiet. One by one, oil lamps are carried back into mud-brick homes. Wooden doors close gently. Children, tired from a day of running, laughing, and celebrating, quickly fall asleep. Outside, the Nile continues its endless journey beneath a sky filled with stars. Inside, another part of Egyptian life begins. This is the part that visitors rarely saw. Not because it was mysterious or forbidden, simply because it belonged to the family. The home was a private world. It was where people could finally set down their tools, relax after long hours of work, and simply be themselves. If you stepped inside an ordinary Egyptian house after sunset, you would probably find a calm and peaceful scene. A small oil lamp flickers against the mud brick walls. The day's heat has faded, leaving the rooms pleasantly cool. The smell of fresh bread still lingers in the air, mixed with the faint scent of lotus oil and wood smoke. Parents sit together while their children slowly drift to sleep. Perhaps a grandmother quietly finishes weaving a basket. Perhaps a grandfather tells one final story before everyone settles in for the night. There is no hurry. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Marriage, as we have already seen, was built on partnership. But once the day's work was finished, husband and wife finally had time to enjoy one another's company. Many Egyptian artworks show couples sitting side by side, holding hands, or placing an arm gently around one another. These are not cold or distant images. They are full of warmth. They remind us that affection was welcomed inside marriage. After a long day in the fields or around the home, even a few quiet minutes together could mean everything. Sometimes love looked like conversation. Sometimes it looked like comfortable silence. The kind where no words are needed because simply being together is enough. Of course, married life also included disagreements. No historical record has ever revealed exactly who forgot to bring in the firewood or who accidentally left the goat wandering through the vegetable garden. But it seems safe to assume that such moments happened from time to time. Even the happiest couples occasionally discover different opinions. Fortunately, tomorrow usually offers another chance to laugh about yesterday. One of the greatest hopes for many married couples was the arrival of children. A growing family meant joy, security, and the promise that future generations would continue caring for the household. Pregnancy was treated with great care. Families believed that both practical knowledge and divine protection were important. Experienced mothers, grandmothers, and midwives shared advice gathered over many years. At the same time, prayers were offered to gods and goddesses believed to watch over mothers and babies. One of the most beloved protectors was Taaret. With the body of a pregnant hippopotamus, the legs of a lion, and the tail of a crocodile, she might seem like an unusual choice to modern eyes. Yet to Egyptians, she represented strength. A mother willing to protect her child from any danger. Small figures of Taaret were often placed inside homes, not because people feared her, because they trusted her. Another important protector was Bes. Unlike the graceful gods shown in temples, Bes appeared short, bearded, and rather cheerful-looking. He was believed to chase away evil spirits, especially those that threatened children or sleeping families. Many parents kept small amulets of Bes near beds or cradles. Apparently, even ancient monsters knew better than to argue with a determined household guardian. These protective charms were common throughout Egypt. Necklaces, bracelets, tiny carved figures, the famous Eye of Horus. People believed these objects offered safety, good health, and good fortune. Whether traveling on the Nile, working in the fields, or sleeping peacefully at home, carrying a protective charm brought comfort. It reminded people that they were never completely alone. The Egyptians also loved little household traditions that mixed practical life with gentle superstition. A special prayer before a journey, an offering of bread or flowers at the family shrine, a whispered blessing over a newborn child. These customs created a feeling of order in a world where floods, illness, and poor harvests could never be fully controlled. If the gods smiled upon the household, life felt a little safer. When a woman became pregnant, family members celebrated quietly. There were no baby showers with colorful balloons or guessing games about names. But there was excitement. Grandparents looked forward to meeting another grandchild. Older brothers and sisters proudly imagined teaching the baby everything they knew, which usually included at least one thing they absolutely should not teach. Children have always been wonderfully creative. During pregnancy, women often wore protective amulets and followed traditions believed to encourage a safe birth. Midwives remained among the most respected women in the community. Their knowledge came not from books, but from years of experience helping countless families welcome new life into the world. When the day of birth finally arrived, women usually remained inside the home surrounded by female relatives and trusted helpers. The father often waited nearby, probably feeling exactly as nervous as fathers have always felt. Some emotions truly never change. The birth of a healthy child filled the household with happiness. Neighbors visited. Relatives offered congratulations. Small gifts might be brought for the growing family. The quiet home suddenly echoed with a sound everyone recognized. A baby's cry, perhaps not the most peaceful sound for sleepy parents, but certainly one of the happiest. Private family life was also filled with routines so ordinary that history rarely writes about them. A husband repairing a broken stool, a wife folding clean linen, children chasing one another through the courtyard despite being told, quite clearly, not to run. A cat pretending not to care about anyone while secretly waiting for scraps of fish. These tiny moments rarely appear in great monuments. Yet they made up almost every day of an ordinary Egyptian life. Love itself quietly matured inside these walls. It was no longer the shy smile exchanged beside the river, no longer the nervous excitement of festivals. Now it became something steadier, helping one another after a difficult day, comforting a sick child through the night, sharing worries about the next harvest, celebrating small victories together. This was the kind of love that lasted, not because it was dramatic, because it was dependable. As the family prepared for sleep, the oil lamp slowly burned lower. The stars shone brightly above the flat rooftops. Some couples climbed onto the roof to enjoy the cool night breeze before resting. They looked out across the quiet village where every home held its own stories, its own hopes, its own little secrets. Nothing extraordinary, simply ordinary people living ordinary lives. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of all. Ancient Egypt was not built only by famous kings. It was built by husbands and wives working side by side, by mothers rocking newborn children, by fathers repairing fishing nets, by grandparents sharing stories beneath the stars. Tomorrow, before sunrise, those same families would wake once again. Together, they would return to the fields, the workshops, the markets, and the river, where husbands and wives worked not as separate lives, but as partners, each depending on the other to keep both their household and their world running smoothly. That is where our journey continues next. The stars slowly fade above the Nile. One by one, they disappear into the pale blue sky as the first light of another morning spreads across the valley. The village begins to stir once again. A rooster calls somewhere in the distance. Donkeys make their usual loud announcements, just in case anyone had managed to sleep through the sunrise. The day is beginning. For an ordinary Egyptian family, this means one thing: work. But unlike the way we often imagine the ancient world, husbands and wives were not living completely separate lives. Their jobs were different in many ways, yet they were deeply connected. Every loaf of bread, every basket of grain, every woven cloth, and every healthy child depended on both of them. Life beside the Nile was built on teamwork. As the morning grows brighter, a husband steps outside carrying his wooden hoe over one shoulder. Beside him walks his oldest son, eager to prove he is strong enough to help. The fields are waiting. Not far behind, his wife stands at the doorway watching them leave. She does not have an easier day ahead, only a different one. The Nile decides almost everything about farming. Each year, the river rises during the flood season, spreading across the fields and covering the land with rich black mud. When the waters slowly return to their banks, they leave behind soil so fertile that crops can grow with remarkable success. The Egyptians understood this cycle better than anyone. They did not fight the flood. They welcomed it. Without it, the green fields would quickly become dry desert. Once the floodwaters disappeared, families hurried to plant wheat and barley before the growing season began. Men usually handled the heavy work of plowing the fields using simple wooden plows pulled by oxen. It was exhausting labor. The hot sun climbed quickly. Dust covered their legs. Their hands grew rough from gripping wooden tools. Still, they worked patiently, knowing every seed carried hope for the months ahead. Meanwhile, back at home, the wife had already begun her own long list of responsibilities. Grain needed grinding, bread needed baking, water had to be collected from the Nile, clothing required washing and repairing, the house needed sweeping, children needed feeding, the family's food stores had to be carefully checked. None of these jobs could wait. Running an Egyptian household was almost like managing a small business. Everything had to be organized. Nothing could be wasted. If grain spoiled, the family might struggle later. If clothing was left unrepaired, it became harder to work. If food was not stored properly, hungry mice would happily solve the problem themselves. Cats, of course, strongly objected to that plan. Fortunately for the family, the cats usually won. But wives did far more than care for the home. During busy farming seasons, many women worked beside their husbands in the fields. They helped sow seeds, gathered vegetables, carried harvested grain, and supported nearly every stage of agricultural life. Ancient Egyptian artwork often shows men and women harvesting crops together, reminding us that farming was truly a family effort. There was little room for the idea that one person's work mattered more than another's. Every task had value. When harvest season finally arrived, the village became busier than ever. Golden fields stretched across the valley. Workers cut stalks of grain using small sickles with sharp stone blades. Bundles were tied together and carried to storage areas. Children helped collect loose pieces left behind. Even grandparents joined where they could, offering advice, tying bundles, or watching younger children while everyone else worked. Harvest was hard, but it was also deeply satisfying. Months of careful effort were finally becoming food for the year ahead. Not every husband was a farmer. Some were fishermen. Long before sunrise, they quietly pushed their boats into the Nile, carrying woven nets over their shoulders. The river was generous, but never predictable. Some mornings brought heavy catches. Other mornings required patience. A fisherman learned quickly that arguing with the Nile rarely changed its mind. Back in the village, wives often cleaned, salted, or dried the fish to preserve them. Once again, one person's work depended upon another's. The same partnership appeared in nearly every profession. A potter shaped clay into jars while his wife decorated finished pieces or sold them at the market. A weaver produced beautiful linen cloth while other family members spun thread, prepared fibers, or managed supplies. A brewer carefully made beer while relatives carried grain, cleaned jars, and prepared ingredients. Success belonged to the whole household. Markets also played an important role. Every few days, families traveled to nearby towns carrying baskets filled with vegetables, woven cloth, pottery, fish, or handmade tools. Instead of using coins for much of Egypt's history, people often traded goods directly. A basket of onions might be exchanged for fresh fish. A linen cloth might earn several clay jars. Everyone understood the value of fair trade. Markets were lively places. Voices filled the air. Children explored every corner until called back by their parents. Neighbors caught up on news. Travelers shared stories from distant villages. And, just as always, someone claimed to know absolutely everything happening everywhere. Every community seems to produce one expert in everybody else's business. Even after long hours of work, husbands and wives still relied on each other at home. A husband might repair a broken chair before sunset. His wife prepared the evening meal. Together they planned tomorrow's work. They discussed whether enough grain remained in storage, whether the fishing nets needed mending, whether the youngest child was finally old enough to help gather firewood instead of accidentally dropping half of it along the path. Progress often arrived one small step at a time. The changing seasons shaped every family. Flood season brought preparation. Planting season demanded hope. Harvest season rewarded patience. The quieter months allowed repairs, weaving, building, fishing, and caring for tools before the cycle began again. Life never truly stopped. It simply changed its rhythm. And through every season, husbands and wives stood beside one another. Sometimes literally, sometimes by supporting each other's different responsibilities. Neither life was easy. Neither life was unimportant. Together they built something much greater than crops or houses. They built stability. Children grew up watching this partnership every single day. A son learned not only how to farm from his father, but also how to respect the work his mother did. A daughter learned not only how to weave or bake, but also that a successful family depended upon cooperation, kindness, and shared responsibility. These lessons could never be fully written on papyrus. They were taught through everyday example. As the evening approaches once more, tired workers slowly return from the fields. Fishing boats glide quietly back toward the shore. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the village. Children run to greet their parents. The day's work is finished. For now, before anyone gathers around the evening meal, many families pause for a quiet moment. A small offering at the household shrine. A whispered prayer. A few words of thanks for another safe day beside the Nile. Because no matter how hard they worked, ordinary Egyptians believed that their lives were guided not only by their own hands, but also by the unseen presence of the gods who watched over every home. And that quiet faith is where our journey leads next. As the sun slips below the western hills, a peaceful silence settles over the village. The day's work is finally done. The fields have emptied. The fishing boats rest quietly along the riverbank. Cooking fires glow softly behind mud brick walls, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted fish drifts gently through the evening air. Inside one small home, a family gathers before their evening meal. But before anyone reaches for the bread, they pause. Only for a moment, the father lights a tiny oil lamp. The mother places a few fresh flowers beside a small wooden figure resting on a simple shelf. The children grow unusually quiet. Together, the family offers a short prayer. No grand ceremony, no crowd, just a few peaceful moments shared inside their own home. For the people of ancient Egypt, faith was not something that belonged only inside great temples. It lived in ordinary houses. It walked beside them through every part of life. Every sunrise, every harvest, every birth, every goodbye. Religion was as natural as breathing. If you visited the home of an ordinary Egyptian family, you would probably notice a small household shrine tucked into one corner. It was not large. Sometimes it was little more than a shelf built into the wall. Upon it might stand a tiny statue, a painted figure, or a carved amulet. Fresh flowers, a small loaf of bread, a bowl of water, perhaps a little incense if the family could afford it. Simple offerings, given with sincere hearts. Each morning, before the day's work began, someone in the family often paused here. A quiet prayer for healthy children, a request for a good harvest, protection during a fishing trip, strength for another long day beneath the Egyptian sun. The prayers were usually simple. The hopes were simple too, and perhaps that made them all the more meaningful. Many different gods watched over different parts of life. The Egyptians believed the world was filled with divine helpers. One of the most beloved was Osiris, the god connected with rebirth and the afterlife. His story reminded people that life continued beyond death and that goodness would be rewarded. His wife, Isis, was admired as the perfect mother and devoted wife. She became a symbol of love, protection, and healing. Many mothers quietly prayed to Isis for the safety of their children. Many wives admired her loyalty. Many husbands admired her courage. She represented the strength that held families together. The falcon-headed Horus watched over kings, but ordinary people also wore the famous Eye of Horus as a protective symbol. Small amulets shaped like the eye hung around children's necks or rested inside family homes. People believed it guarded against illness and bad fortune. Whether it truly carried magical power is impossible to know, but it certainly carried hope, and hope itself can be a comforting companion. Bes remained one of the family's favorite protectors. His cheerful face appeared on beds, furniture, mirrors, and household objects. Children especially loved him. He was believed to frighten away nightmares and evil spirits while bringing laughter into the home. Not every guardian needs to look serious. Sometimes the funniest face is also the bravest. Taweret continued watching over mothers and newborn children. Her unusual appearance, a hippopotamus standing upright with powerful limbs, might seem surprising today. Yet the Egyptians saw something different. They saw a fierce mother willing to protect her family at any cost. Few forces in nature are stronger than a mother protecting her child. Some truths never grow old. Religion also shaped the rhythm of each day. The rising sun reminded people of the sun god Ra beginning his daily journey across the sky. Each sunset marked his passage into the mysterious world beyond the horizon before he would rise again the next morning. Watching the sunrise was not only beautiful, it was a daily reminder that darkness never lasted forever. Every dawn carried the promise of another beginning. Many families also remembered their ancestors. Although modern historians sometimes debate exactly how ordinary Egyptians honored deceased relatives, it is clear that family connections remained important. The dead were not simply forgotten. They continued to be remembered with respect and affection. Perhaps a family quietly spoke the name of a beloved grandparent while sharing stories during the evening meal. Perhaps a small offering of bread was left during a special occasion. Memory itself became an act of love. The great temples certainly impressed visitors with their enormous stone columns, towering statues, and beautifully painted walls. But most ordinary Egyptians rarely entered the sacred inner rooms where priests served the gods each day. Instead, they experienced religion through festivals, processions, local shrines, and family traditions. Faith belonged to everyone, not only to priests or rulers. Children learned these customs naturally. No one handed them a long book of rules. Instead, they watched, they copied, they listened. A little girl watched her mother place flowers beside the household shrine. Soon she did the same. A little boy watched his father whisper a prayer before setting out to fish. Years later, he found himself speaking the very same words. Traditions often survive because children quietly become their parents. There were also special days when families visited local temples together. The smell of incense floated through the air. Priests sang hymns. Offerings of bread, fruit, flowers, and beer filled the temple courtyards. Musicians played soft melodies using harps and sistrums. Children stared in amazement at brightly painted statues covered in gold leaf. Even those who could not fully understand the ceremonies felt something important was happening. The gods seemed close, very close. Faith also offered comfort during difficult times. A failed harvest, a family illness, the loss of someone dearly loved. Life beside the Nile was beautiful, but it was never free from hardship. Prayer could not always change what happened, but it helped people carry hope through uncertain days. Perhaps that is one of faith's greatest gifts. Not easy answers, quiet strength. As the evening grows darker, the family finishes its meal. The children yawn. The oil lamp flickers softly. Outside, crickets begin their nightly song while the Nile reflects thousands of bright stars. Before going to sleep, one last glance is given toward the household shrine. The tiny flame still burns. Tomorrow morning it will be lit once again. Another prayer, another sunrise, another ordinary day blessed with extraordinary meaning. The years pass almost without anyone noticing. Children slowly become parents. Parents become grandparents. The young couple who once exchanged shy smiles beside the river now watch their own children fall in love beneath the very same stars. Time moves gently along the Nile, and with it comes the quiet beauty of growing old, surrounded by family, memories, and a lifetime of love. That is where our journey now leads. The years pass quietly beside the Nile. One flood follows another. The fields turn green, then golden, then green again. Children who once chased butterflies through the reeds now walk with confident steps of their own. The little mud brick house that once echoed with a baby's first cries is now filled with the cheerful voices of grandchildren. Time has a gentle way of changing everything, and yet somehow it also changes very little. The young husband who once nervously offered a lotus flower at a village festival now has silver beginning to show in his hair. The young wife who carefully braided her hair before every celebration now smiles as she watches her granddaughter do exactly the same thing. She remembers those days, perhaps more clearly than anyone realizes. Growing old in ancient Egypt was considered a blessing. Life was not easy. Many people never reached old age because of illness, accidents, or difficult working conditions. Medical knowledge was impressive for its time, but it could only do so much. So when someone lived long enough to become a grandparent, they earned something very valuable: respect. Gray hair was often seen as a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. Older people had survived floods, poor harvests, hot summers, and many seasons of hard work. They had made mistakes. They had learned from them. Now younger generations came to them for advice, not because they knew everything, but because they had seen almost everything. Each evening, after the day's work was finished, grandchildren often gathered around their grandparents. The older man might sit on a low wooden stool outside the house while the cool evening breeze drifted across the village. The children settled nearby, waiting for another story. Perhaps he spoke about the year the Nile rose higher than anyone expected, or the time a stubborn donkey somehow wandered into the neighbor's grain store and refused to leave. Some family stories improve a little with every telling. The grandchildren laughed anyway. The grandmother shared different lessons. She showed young girls how to weave fine linen, how to prepare bread with just the right amount of water, how to recognize herbs used for simple medicines. She taught not only skills, she taught patience. A family's greatest treasures were not always stored inside wooden chests. Sometimes they lived inside the memories of the oldest person in the room. As parents grew older, their children naturally began helping more with daily work. The strong young son now carried the heavy grain sacks that his father once lifted with ease. A daughter quietly finished chores before her mother even had to ask. No one spoke much about these changes. They simply happened. Caring for elderly parents was seen as both a responsibility and an honor. After all, these were the same hands that had once carried you, the same voices that had comforted you during storms, the same people who had worked countless days to give their children a better life. Now it was the children's turn to give something back. For many couples, old age also brought something precious: time. When they were young, every hour had been filled with work. Fields, fishing, bread, children, harvests. Life rarely slowed down. Now, with grown sons and daughters helping manage the household, husband and wife finally found more quiet moments together. Perhaps they sat outside in the evening watching the Nile glow beneath the setting sun. They no longer needed many words. After decades together, silence itself had become comfortable. Sometimes the husband smiled as he watched his wife speaking with their grandchildren. He remembered the shy young woman he had first met beside the river all those years ago. She still smiled the same way, perhaps a little slower now, perhaps with a few more lines around her eyes, but just as warmly. The wife, in turn, noticed how carefully he still repaired broken tools before anyone else even realized they needed fixing. Some habits stayed with a person forever. Love had changed over the years. It was no longer the excitement of secret glances during festivals, no longer the nervous feeling of wondering whether someone liked you back. Now it had become something quieter, a shared blanket during a cool evening, a hand offered while stepping over uneven ground, saving the last sweet fig for the other person without mentioning it. The greatest romances often become the gentlest. Children noticed these small acts without realizing it. They grew up believing kindness was simply part of marriage. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson their parents ever taught them. Grandparents also became the keepers of family history. They remembered births, weddings, floods, good harvests, hard winters, the day a cousin caught an enormous fish that somehow became even larger every time the story was told. Memory has always enjoyed adding a little extra excitement. When visitors arrived, grandparents happily introduced every grandchild by name. Usually, most of the time, large families occasionally made this slightly challenging. The grandchildren did not mind. They knew exactly who was meant. As age slowly advanced, everyday work naturally became more difficult. Heavy lifting gave way to lighter tasks. Older men repaired tools instead of plowing entire fields. Older women spun thread, mended clothing, or cared for young children while younger adults handled the busiest chores. Everyone still contributed. No one was expected to become useless simply because their hair had turned gray. Experience remained one of the household's greatest strengths. Yet even while enjoying family life, older Egyptians understood something every generation eventually learns. Time is precious. No one lives forever. The Egyptians did not fear this truth in quite the same way many people do today. Instead, they believed life continued beyond death. Just as the sun disappeared each evening only to rise again the next morning, they believed the soul would continue its own journey. This belief brought comfort. Preparing for that future was not considered gloomy. It was simply another part of life's natural path. A husband and wife who had spent 40 or 50 years together hoped they would remain together even beyond this world. Their love was not expected to end beside the river. It would continue somewhere beyond the western horizon, where the sun itself disappeared each evening. As another peaceful sunset paints the Nile with shades of gold and orange, the elderly couple sits quietly outside their home. Children laugh in the distance. Grandchildren chase one another through the courtyard. The smell of fresh bread rises once more from the kitchen. Life continues, just as it always has. The old couple smiles. They have lived good lives, worked hard, loved deeply, raised a family. Now their thoughts slowly turn toward the next great journey. A journey every Egyptian hoped would lead not into darkness, but into another beautiful beginning. That is where our story gently continues next, as we explore how ordinary Egyptians prepared for the life they believed awaited them beyond the setting sun. Eventually, every Egyptian family reached a moment they wished could be delayed forever. A chair at the evening meal remained empty. A familiar voice no longer answered from the next room. The gentle footsteps that had crossed the courtyard every morning quietly faded into memory. Saying goodbye has never been easy. Not today. Not 3,500 years ago. Yet the people of ancient Egypt faced this part of life with remarkable hope. They believed that death was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of another journey. Just as the Nile continued flowing beyond every bend in the river, they believed the human soul continued beyond the final breath. This belief shaped nearly everything they did. When someone passed away, the family gathered together. There were tears. There was grief. Ancient Egyptians loved their families deeply, and losing someone they cared for hurt just as much as it does today. History sometimes shows us statues with calm faces and perfect smiles. Real life was different. Real people cried. Children missed their grandparents. Husbands mourned their wives. Wives mourned their husbands. Parents mourned their children. Love leaves behind sorrow because it first gave us joy. Family members comforted one another as neighbors quietly arrived to help. Food was prepared. Visitors came to offer sympathy. Stories about the person's life were shared. Laughter sometimes appeared through the tears as someone remembered a funny moment from years before. Perhaps everyone smiled while recalling the grandfather who insisted he could still outfish men half his age. Or the grandmother who somehow always knew when a child had been sneaking extra honey cakes. Some memories deserve to be smiled at. For wealthier Egyptians, preparing the body often included the famous process of mummification. Today, mummies are one of the first things many people think about when they hear the words ancient Egypt. But the truth was a little more ordinary. The long and elaborate mummification process that we see in museums was expensive. Most ordinary villagers could never afford it. Instead, simpler burials were far more common. The body might be carefully wrapped in linen and placed in a simple coffin or buried in the dry desert sand, where the natural climate helped preserve it. The goal was not luxury, it was respect. Every person deserved a peaceful farewell. Before the burial, loved ones often washed the body carefully. Fresh linen was wrapped with great care. Flowers might be placed nearby. Favorite belongings were gathered. Each small action became one final expression of love. It was the family's last chance to care for someone who had spent a lifetime caring for them. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed certain things for the journey ahead. So many families placed simple objects inside the grave. A clay bowl, a favorite necklace, a walking stick, a small wooden chair, food such as bread, dried fish, dates, or beer. Not because they believed someone would literally eat these things in the tomb, but because they hoped their loved one would have everything needed in the beautiful world beyond. Wealthier families filled tombs with furniture, clothing, jewelry, and carefully painted scenes of everyday life. Ordinary families offered what they could. The value of the gift mattered less than the love behind it. One belief stood above almost all others: the hope of meeting loved ones again. To the Egyptians, the afterlife was not meant to be a strange or frightening place. It was imagined as a peaceful version of Egypt itself. Green fields stretched beside gentle waters. Fruit trees were always full. Harvests never failed. Families reunited. Old age disappeared. Pain and illness were left behind forever. Imagine waking each morning beside the Nile, healthy once again, surrounded by everyone you had ever loved. That was the future many Egyptians hoped awaited them. Of course, reaching that peaceful place required living a good life. The Egyptians believed the heart carried the record of every person's actions. After death, it would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, balance, and justice. A heart made heavy by cruelty or dishonesty would struggle. A heart filled with kindness and fairness would be welcomed into eternal peace. It is a beautiful idea that what matters most is not wealth, not power, not fame, but the way we treat one another. Perhaps that lesson feels just as meaningful today. Family members continued remembering those who had passed away. Special offerings of bread, flowers, or beer might be left at tombs during important occasions. Prayers were whispered, names were spoken aloud. To remember someone was, in many ways, to keep them close. Being forgotten was considered one of the saddest possibilities. So families told stories. Grandparents who had passed away were introduced to grandchildren who had never met them. This was your grandfather. He loved fishing. This was your grandmother. She baked the finest bread in the village. Memory became another kind of immortality. As the years passed, children became parents. Parents became grandparents. Life continued exactly as the Nile continued flowing. One generation gently stepped aside while another took its place. Yet no one was ever truly gone as long as their love remained inside the family they had helped build. As the sun slowly sets once again over the western horizon, its golden light stretches across the calm river. To the Egyptians, this daily sunset held special meaning. Ra, the great sun god, disappeared into the world beyond, only to rise again the following morning. Every sunset whispered the same comforting promise. This is not the end, only the evening before another dawn. Perhaps an elderly husband who had lost his beloved wife stood quietly beside the river at sunset. He watched the golden light dance across the water. He remembered the festivals they had shared. the children they had raised, the countless evenings they had spent talking beneath the stars. He smiled softly, not because he no longer missed her, but because he believed this goodbye would not last forever. That hope gave peace to countless Egyptian families for thousands of years. As darkness gently settles across the village one final time, oil lamps glow behind quiet windows. Children sleep peacefully. Parents whisper goodnight. The Nile flows onward, unchanged by the passing centuries. Our own journey is almost complete. Only one final evening remains. A peaceful farewell beside the timeless river, where ordinary lives, quiet love, and endless hope come together beneath a sky full of stars. The day is coming to an end. The golden sun slowly sinks toward the western horizon, painting the waters of the Nile with soft shades of amber, orange, and deep red. The river moves as gently as it did this morning, and as it did 1,000 mornings before that. Some things never seem to change. A fisherman guides his small wooden boat toward the shore, its net resting quietly after another day's work. Farmers walk home along dusty paths with tired but satisfied smiles. Children race ahead of their parents, somehow finding enough energy for one last game before bedtime. Behind them, the village waits. Thin trails of smoke rise from cooking fires. Cats stretch lazily in the last warmth of the day. Palm trees sway gently in the evening breeze. It is peaceful, the kind of peace that arrives only after a long day filled with honest work. Inside one mud-brick home, a mother places fresh bread onto a small wooden table. The smell fills the room immediately. Her husband washes the dust from his hands after returning from the fields. Their children hurry inside, still laughing about something that happened near the river. One insists the fish he saw was as long as a crocodile. His sister rolls her eyes. Their grandfather quietly smiles. He has heard this story before. The fish somehow grows larger every single year. The family gathers together. Bread is passed from hand to hand. Grilled fish is shared. Dates and figs are placed in the center of the table. Clay cups filled with cool beer for the adults and lighter drinks for the children rest nearby. No one rushes. No one looks toward a clock. There isn't one. The only measure of time is the fading sunlight outside the doorway. Conversation flows as naturally as the river itself. The father speaks about tomorrow's planting. The mother reminds everyone that more grain must be ground in the morning. A grandmother laughs as she watches the youngest grandchild proudly announce that he helped carry firewood today. He forgets to mention that he dropped half of it along the path. Some victories deserve a little generosity. As the meal ends, the dishes are quietly gathered. The youngest children begin rubbing sleepy eyes. One little girl leans against her mother's shoulder. A boy curls up beside his grandfather before realizing he is far too sleepy to continue listening to another story. Outside, the village slowly grows quieter. The last birds settle into the trees. The donkeys, thankfully, decide they have announced enough for one day. Even they seem ready for sleep. Oil lamps are lit one by one. Their small golden flames dance gently against the mud brick walls, filling each room with a warm, comforting glow. For many families, this becomes their favorite time of day. The work is finished. Tomorrow's worries can wait until tomorrow. For now, there is only family. A husband and wife quietly step outside onto the flat roof of their home. The evening air is cool against their skin. Above them stretches a sky overflowing with stars. Without the bright lights of modern cities, the heavens seem almost close enough to touch. The Milky Way glows softly overhead like a pale ribbon crossing the darkness. The husband reaches for his wife's hand, not because anyone is watching, because after so many years together, it feels natural. They do not speak for a while. They simply watch the river, the same river where they first noticed one another as nervous young adults, the same river beside which they celebrated festivals, raised children, welcomed grandchildren, and said goodbye to loved ones. The Nile has quietly witnessed every chapter of their lives. It has asked for nothing. It has simply continued to flow. Perhaps that is why the Egyptians loved it so deeply. Without the Nile, there would be no fields, no villages, no bread, no festivals, no homes, no stories like the one we have shared tonight. The river was never just water. It was life itself. Across the village, another elderly woman gently rocks her newest grandchild to sleep. She hums a soft tune that her own mother once sang to her many decades ago. No one remembers exactly who first created the melody. Perhaps it is older than anyone alive. Perhaps it has drifted beside the Nile for hundreds of years. The baby slowly closes tiny eyes. Another generation has begun. Life continues, just as it always has. Somewhere nearby, a young couple walks slowly along the riverbank. Their conversation is quiet. Occasionally they laugh. Perhaps they are where our story once began. Still wondering if the other feels the same. Still dreaming about the future. Still believing that life together might become something beautiful. And perhaps years from now, they too will sit beneath these same stars, watching grandchildren run through the village while remembering the first time they met. The story begins again. It always does. As midnight approaches, almost every home falls silent. Only the gentle sound of insects fills the warm night air. The Nile whispers softly against its banks. Far above, the stars continue their slow journey across the heavens. Thousands of years have passed since families like these lived beside this river. Their houses have crumbled. Their voices have faded. Their footprints have long disappeared beneath the sands of time. Yet in so many ways they do not feel distant at all. They loved. They worried. They laughed. They hoped. They worked hard to give their children better lives. They celebrated weddings. They comforted one another during sorrow. They treasured quiet evenings with family. The names may be forgotten, but the feelings remain wonderfully familiar. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson ancient Egypt leaves us. History is not only the story of great kings or towering pyramids. It is also the story of ordinary people. A mother baking bread before sunrise. A father teaching his son to cast a fishing net. A grandmother telling stories beneath the stars. Two young hearts falling in love beside the Nile. Those small moments built a civilization that still captures our imagination thousands of years later. And now, as our own journey gently comes to an end, the village sleeps peacefully. The oil lamps have gone dark. The breeze carries the scent of river water and distant lotus flowers. The moon casts a silver path across the calm Nile. Somewhere, hidden among the reeds, a frog croaks softly. Even the river seems to whisper goodnight. So as you close your eyes and let your own thoughts drift like the gentle current, remember those ordinary families who lived, loved, and dreamed beneath this same sky so long ago. Though more than 3 millennia separate their world from ours, the things that mattered most were never so different. A warm home, a loving family, kind heart, peaceful evening, and the quiet hope that tomorrow's sunrise would bring another beautiful day. The Nile flows on, the stars still shine, and somewhere in the endless pages of history, The little village we visited tonight is settling into sleep once again. Good night,